Welcome to the most recent edition of SABR's Deadball Era Committee Author Book Talks. Welcome to the latest edition of SABR's Deadball Era Committee Baseball Author Book Talks.
Trying to see all the bobbleheads in Jacob's over Jacob's right shoulder and trying to figure out if I can't figure them out. They're too far away.
Well, I might as well admit people and we can formally start at, 7:02 or something. As long
I
as
have a
people,
train. I have a train going by here in a second, so you might hear some noise in the background because my computer's telling me it hears it. So be ready.
is that it? Or am I hearing something in my headphones?
No,
I
it's
thought I heard
slowly coming by.
something. Oh,
It was blowing a whistle earlier, so I could hear. It was coming. It's going by. It's not that loud. It's loud to me. You probably can't hear it. Not loud, but there you go.
so for everybody on the screen, I'm just in the process of admitting people as they show up here, and we'll probably start at 7:02 or so. Jacob, you can see the waiting room as well, right? I think we're good for now.
No, I don't believe I'm a co-host. I was not signed in on the Zoom account.
All right, well, I'll go ahead and start it. Welcome to the most recent edition of SABR's Deadball Era Committee Authors Book Talk. Just as a reminder, the show typically goes for about an hour, and our guest, will speak for probably 30 to 40 minutes, maybe a little longer, and then we'll open it up for questions. Tonight, we're really excited to have Dave Heller. Dave is a lifelong baseball fan. He has written and reported on sports for more than 30 years for many national newspapers, magazines, and websites. Dave first started researching, working for SABR legend John Holway while in college. Professionally, he wrote about baseball for Reds Report magazine and covered Minnesota Twins and Milwaukee Brewers prospects. He has written 5 sports books, one centered on the Deadball era, a biography of Eddie Plank, which won the Ritter Award in 2022, and another with significant Deadball era content, Ken Williams, a slugger in Ruth's shadow, about a player who debuted in the teens. Dave's other books are As good as it got, the 1944 St. Louis Browns, facing Ted Williams, players from the golden age of baseball recall the greatest hitter who ever lived, and Parisian Bob Caruthers, baseball's first two-way star, which was just released this year. Dave, it's great to have you here.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me. I am very much looking forward to it. So yeah, let's go.
All right, well, let's just start with one of the most basic questions. How did you first get interested in SABR?
It started the first time actually I joined was in like the mid 90s, I'm gonna say. Just baseball fan, found out about it, wanted to learn more about it, and then had two kids, life got in the way, kind of dropped off for a while. And then picking things back, starting to write books, obviously research, a very big reason why I got interested in SABR, all the tools available, and I'm on the email list and kind of groups like that. So that's kind of how I got back into it, was starting to get back into doing the actual research myself, saying, hey, SABR is probably a good place to be, and it is. So it was a very good decision on my part.
Absolutely, it's a great spot. So maybe then just move on. How did you first get started as an author?
So back in again, I go back to the 90s, having a talk with my then girlfriend, future wife, future ex-wife, that talking about like dreams and all that kind of stuff, what you want to do, and if you could do anything, what would you do, blah blah blah. And for whatever reason, I said, you know what, I'd like to write a book on 1944 St. Louis Browns, because really, who wouldn't want to do that? And I knew nothing about books, nothing about publishing, nothing how to get something published, no idea how to research a book, no idea how to write a book. But yet at the time I was working a lot of freelance stuff, so I had a lot of, and most of that was during the night covering sports, so my days were very free. So I decided to go for it, and I could probably spend an hour talking to you about the trials and tribulations of being young and dumb and not knowing what you're doing and writing your first book and actually somehow getting it published years later. But that's kind of how it started. I'll cut it short and not bore you all with the rest of the details for now.
Well, that's kind of why we're here. I mean, this is part of the story. Reason we're here is to talk about author journeys.
Yeah.
So, well, let me just ask you about sort of writing nonfiction, because that's what a lot of us here who write do, and who follow. That's what a lot of us read, right? And SABR is nonfiction. And one of the things I really like about your books is you get that nice narrative flow. You create a sense of drama. Are there any tricks? And you've obviously been a writer for a long time, not just books, but how do you make nonfiction interesting while also being informative and pithy?
Well, first, thanks for saying it's interesting. I appreciate that. It's a compliment, obviously. Two, pithy is a great word, and I'm glad I fall in that category. I love the word pithy. That's just the way. I mean, when I first started writing, I actually was a broadcast journalism major, and got into writing not accidentally, just kind of the way fortunes fell. So I didn't have any formal really writing training in college or anywhere else. I just wrote the way I spoke almost. And when I first started writing, it was the Cincinnati Post, and I had an editor who kind of said, "Oh, you have an interesting writing style. It's different." And I think it's because I just had no one to teach me how to do it. So that's kind of how I write. I just write with, I don't have any rules or regulations or whatever else, and not following any English manual. I just kind of write the way I think, and then thankfully, you think it's interesting. I appreciate that. So that's just kind of the easy answer about how I do that.
So obviously, at least 1.5 of your books have been on the Deadball era. What excited you? I'm curious. Also, what's obviously the Browns are a unique story, but what sort of captivated you about the Deadball era? Was it something about the era in Plank and Williams, or were they two biographical top subjects that you were interested in? Just maybe talk a little bit about your thoughts on the Deadball era and
Yeah.
why.
Kind of two different answers there for you. So why I'm interested in Deadball era, like I've been interested in, like probably most of you, in baseball and baseball history since I was little. As I was a kid, I can remember. I'm wearing the hat now mainly because I need a haircut, but I wear an Orioles hat because I am an Orioles fan, and so is someone who likes baseball, loves baseball, just saying loves history, and two combined. The St. Louis Browns were an obvious connection with the Orioles, and then I'm not old enough to have been around when the Browns were around, so I definitely have a curiosity about the Browns. But generally speaking, like the Deadball era, I've always been interested in, like, I would say pre-1940 baseball, regardless of the year. And I think it's because mainly the 50s, really, some in the 40s, like we have TV highlights and film highlights and things like that of those players, but there's not much that exists, obviously, before that, especially Deadball era, right? There's very, especially growing up, there's very little, video of these guys playing ball or interviews or anything like that. So it's just a natural, and again, I'm a curious person as well. So just the natural curiosity of like trying to know more about this era where like, Mickey Mantle, who doesn't know about Mickey Mantle, everything about Mickey Mantle, like, what about Eddie Plank? Who knows about Eddie Plank? Two different eras, two different players, two different things. The Ken Williams answer is an easy one. Again, I'm a Browns fan. He was the first 30-30 player, and that was definitely a book of what do you call it? Passion book, whatever. Yeah, it was just something I was curious about, so I wanted to write it. And if you read it, thank you. I enjoyed researching that one and writing it.
Which is a great segue into so maybe talk a little bit about how you go about researching your topics, and if you found some differences or similarities between. I mean, obviously, I'm guessing the Ted Williams book was a little different than the others, but
sure.
Maybe talk about how you go about researching your topics.
Yeah, the first two books maybe we should put aside as because the Browns book was written in the 90s. Internet really didn't exist, so that was pretty much all going to libraries and doing things like that. So, which the last few books have been more the internet era, where a lot of stuff is online, right? So through SABR, obviously I can get paper record, I can get newspapers.com, now I can get ProQuest, and things like that. So that made life easier. There's, Library of Congress site. There's, as you guys know, there's tons of sites out there. You can find stuff online. And Eddie Plank, especially, I could find the Gettysburgian, I believe remember it was called, the college newspaper, also is online. So that made life so much. And he played for teams that coincidentally, the papers are online. St. Louis and Philadelphia, those are all online. So it made life a lot easier. There are times I have to go on the road, and Ken Williams, I did go to Oregon. I did a lot of Ken Williams is kind of half internet, half microfilm, which if anyone's ever done microfilm, you know how much fun that can be. And I got lucky a few times there just getting some stuff, but I did go to Oregon to get a lot of Oregon papers because he is from Oregon, played out there when he was younger. For my Bob Caruthers book, I did go to Grand Rapids because that was the one minor league team I could not find that he played for that was online. So I went to Grand Rapids for that one. Eddie Plank book, I sat in a chair. I don't think I went anywhere other than the library to look up maybe like ancestry.com to find that kind of stuff, birth certificates and marriage records and census and stuff like that. So a lot of it now is just sitting here where I'm talking to you, going to find sites, and which is a lot easier than doing microfilm. I'll tell you that 100%.
I mean, were there any sources that you found particularly useful? I mean, newspapers.com, I'm assuming, and
right.
Sporting News, but were there that was the key?
Yeah, that's the main crux. I mean, there are books too, obviously, right? Things that have been written about, but those are usually bit pieces here and there. The main crux is newspapers for me, and so yeah, any newspaper site that you can think of, I've probably been on. Scouting. I mean, I borrowed people's IDs from different libraries to get on different webs, different things. That's just between me and you and anyone watching this. Yeah. So anything out there is probably not gonna found it online. That's the big one. I mean, that's anyone can go online and find stuff. It's great. It's a great resource. We're living in. I always had a boss who said, we're living in the greatest information age in the history of mankind, where everything's at your fingertips. So that's kind of how I feel.
So let's maybe dive into the books a little bit here. Not so much obviously we'll ask about some of the interesting stuff you found while researching them, but maybe just going back to Plank. Or starting with Plank as the Deadball person book for this podcast. Talk to me a little bit more about what attracted you to Plank. I mean, how did you decide that you were going to go, live in his shoes for 2 or 3 years? I mean, having done biographies, I know just you basically spend your time as a person for a long time, and you got to hope you pick someone that it's interesting to be doing that for.
Yeah, it's funny how people with the number one question someone asks you write a book, it always is, why did you write about so and so? My answer always is, fame, fortune, and women, and I'm over 3. So with Plank, the first 3 books I had an idea. Those were ideas. It popped in my head for whatever reason, divine intervention or just curiosity, whatever you want to say. And I was just like, I felt like writing another book. I don't know, again, I don't know why. It's a lot of time, not a lot of money, not a lot of bang for your buck, but I do enjoy the work. It's very fun. And I love learning stuff. And So one day I went on Baseball Reference and I was like, who can I write about? I mean, that's a pretty broad question to ask oneself going to Baseball Reference. So I decided to look at like, I don't know, I think it's first I looked at 3,000 hit club guys, and then I went to 300 game winners. And I just went down a list of every 300 game winner. Like, okay, I know that guy. That guy's, Christian Matthews, Walter Johnson, Brooks Vitteran, those guys, Lefty Grove. Like, I'm not gonna list all the guys, but you get the idea. And then there was a couple 19th century guys on there, obviously as well. And then there was Plank, and he was like the one guy I knew who Eddie Plank was and who he played for. I knew bits and pieces, but I didn't really know Eddie Plank. So I decided, that's a good, maybe no one else knows about Eddie Plank either. The guy did win 300 games and he's in the Hall of Fame. Maybe we should know more about him. So that's kind of, yeah, that's pretty much it. Went through the list, saw Eddie Plank, and picked him out, ran with it.
I mean, one of the things about doing biographies is putting the person in the context of their times. I mean, can you talk a little bit about, like, for example, how you did that with Plank in the Deadball era?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I've always said is, it's don't judge people on present day mores, right? So we have to kind of live in that era, and so a lot of times, and this especially true more with 19th century perhaps, but even in the 1910s, 1920s, things were different obviously back then, and a lot of the stuff maybe people here would shake a not shake a head at, but a lot of things I just take from you research the player, but sometimes you're going through newspaper, so you can kind of read what's going on during the time as well. So I think that kind of informs you of what the times were like. And I did not live in Eddie Plank's time, obviously. No one here did either. So we can read about it and hear about it. And maybe some stories are not always the way we think, but you look at a headline, sometimes you're like, oh, that's interesting. And that's how things were presented. So I try to keep that kind of path in the book, try to keep it written as if, we're in that era, instead of trying to write it as if we're writing, we're talking about it in 2025, because it's not fair to Eddie Plank or anyone else looking at the era to give our views from this era to their era, because it's not the same.
What were maybe one or two surprising things that you learned about Plank during your research?
Yeah, well, I knew nothing about him, so almost everything was surprising. But one of the things, and I don't know if surprising is the right word, but we'll go with it. There's a story that was written, and it's been in books I found for decades, even in one in this century, that Plank and Christy Mathewson pitched against each other when they were both in college. Both came from the same kind of area, the same time frame, which just was not true. Nowadays, back then, there's a story I took hold because they didn't have the research that we have today. But obviously, I can just prove it by showing Mathewson was in college XX years and Plank was in college XX years, and they just never intersected. But I think the best part was, I found a thing in the Sporting News where Plank's widow said, they never pitched against each other. Eddie never talked about it. And he talked about everything baseball related. It's just kind of prove that that story, which actually was done by Grantland Rice, which is kind of interesting, was just totally fabricated. So that was one of the more fun ones. Also, just learning more about the whole Federal League, which a very interesting topic, and my another curiosity, and just going through the entire year of how he ended up in the Federal League, not kind of the way it's been presented over the years. So that was a good surprising one, I guess.
Moving on to Ken Williams just for a minute. I mean, one of the interesting things about doing a biography of Williams from a baseball sense is that he started in the Deadball era.
Right.
And then, of course, you go into a completely different environment for baseball in the 20s. Can you talk a little bit about your findings there? Were there anything interesting you found from between the, beyond just sort of the live ball era, just thoughts you had on the changing baseball environment that?
Yeah, I mean, you guys are all Deadball era people, so I don't need to tell you what the era was like and all that kind of stuff. But there were home runs hit in the Deadball era. Maybe not. Babe Ruth did not start the home run, but so Ken Williams was actually called Home Run Williams when he played for a semi-pro team in California. So he had power. He always had power. He wasn't the slap happy hitter. It was I mean, he did bunt, like that was the era and things like that. But when he went to the Reds in 1915 and 16, Buck Herzog was his manager, changed his hitting style, so he didn't have that power. He kind of sapped him of his power. And he went back to the minors, and he hit 24 home runs, I want to say, in 1917 in Portland, 192 games. Still, decent number for that era. So he always had power. but never really, not in the Ruthian live ball era, and that's when he really took off. And it happened one day in the dugout. So he was an all fields hitter throughout his career until this point. We were sitting in the dugout with his teammates, and they were talking about Babe Ruth, who was knocking home runs out of the park left and right, and that short, he could hit left-handed, he could pop in the right field. And at Sportsman's Park had a very had a shorter right field porch. And his teammates said to Ken, you're left-handed, you have this power, you could do the same thing. And that's when he decided to change his swing and kind of aim a little more towards right field instead of become an all fields hitter. And that's when, led the league in home runs in 22 and all that. So he was always kind of a power guy, not a supreme power guy until he changed his stance. So I don't know to answer your question, but he kind of did live both eras. Yeah.
No, interesting how, he adapted to, once the era changed, you adapt, which is what you need in a great player. So, I mean, were there any different challenges you found in doing the biographies of the two? I mean, where the research was fairly similar, the process? Were there any sort of just differences in process or?
Process is pretty much the same. Obviously, one of the big challenges for anyone born, who played in the 19 teens or 20s is, they're not around, and their siblings, their spouses aren't around, and the people they played against aren't around. So there's no, which I found in my Ted Williams book, sometimes that's not always the most reliable information is talking to people about things that happened 50 years ago. But with Ken Williams, I did talk to both his sons, which is I was very fortunate to get all of them. But the thing is, Ken never talked to his sons about baseball. They never asked him about, he just kind of put in the past, and he talked to his buddies and all that kind of stuff. So doing that was more trying to get more what was Ken like, which you can't read in the papers, right? You can't read what these guys really were like off the field that much. So that was one challenge with Plank too. I know he's a very reserved guy, but there was no one I could talk to about that, and no one I did talk to about that. So that was a big challenge. I had to take everything kind of out of the papers and things like that. So that's just a challenge of guys who were played 100 years ago.
Are there any other? Given this is a Deadball era committee conversation, we don't really want to go into all the other books, but and their topics. But are there any just generic comments you'd like to make on any of the other books that you found interesting or surprises or anything before we?
Yeah, Bob Caruthers did umpire in the Deadball era, so that counts a little bit. He umpired in the American League in 1903. So he was there, and so I'll just get a quick run through. Obviously, the Browns book, like I said, is just on a team. 44 Browns, the only team to win the World Series. That was again, I was young and dumb, didn't know what I was doing. The fact it got published is kind of a miracle, but the fact that it got published allowed me to say I can write books. So I went to Ted Williams book was a fun, whole different thing. All I do was talk to players. That was the whole book. Got to talk to Wade Boggs. That was kind of cool too. And then, like I said, the Caruthers book was more 19th century, whole different form of baseball. But he did umpire in the Deadball era. And one thing I read about Bob Caruthers was he was there was some, I can't remember where I saw it. They said he was not a good umpire and this and that. And I read, actually that was not true necessarily, but he was a very disciplinarian, very strict rule man, which I can understand. I'm a rule follower, and he got a lot of skirmishes with players, and when he umpired the American League, so that was kind of fun as well. Yeah, he was a fun guy to research. He was definitely a personality. They're like Ken Williams and Eddie Plank were kind of laid back guys, kept to themselves. Bob Caruthers was not that at all.
I would hope so if your nickname is Parisian. So.
Yeah.
So you've written 3 biographies. Is there something in particular that drew you to that genre?
I like to read nonfiction myself. Like I'm a history guy. Doing that Browns book was not the easiest. Think about it now. Again, young and dumb, don't know any better. Just I think focusing on one person is I don't say easier route. Nothing's easy, but I don't know. I'd like to know more about. Like I said, I'm very curious. So I get curious about these guys. Who are they? What were they like? All that kind of stuff. So it's easy to focus on one person and kind of learn more about that than the entire team. A team is, you can be curious about a team, but it's just a team. It's just one season. So I want to know more about the lifetime of a person. So that's kind of draws me to biographies. But it's not fun because you're going over 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years. It take a while, but yeah.
Are there any challenges to writing biographies that we haven't? I mean, you've just discussed them, but any others that comments you want to add before? And maybe just as part of that,
Yeah.
any guidance you would offer to others writing biographies?
Yeah, just sometimes when I'm writing, I'm still researching. Like I'll be writing and like, oh, what happened here? Did I miss something? I'll go back and kind of do a double back and research. But this kind of going back to my don't presume anything is the truth until you find it out, and it's the only truth to you, right? Because like I said with that whole Eddie Plank story, this thing has gone down in history books as being fact, and it's not. Because I read a book that was written or found it in a book that was written like in 2010, and that story was repeated. So a story's been going on for almost 100 years until I found I wrote it otherwise. But yeah, just it ain't easy. Be prepared to be sitting in front of a computer or a microfilm or whatever else for a long time. Because if you're doing a biography, like you're going from day one, not just from day one to the person who died, but even afterwards, especially if they're notable and with the Hall of Fame or had a Hall of Fame potential credentials, you want to find out as much as you can. So yeah, it's a lot of work, but enjoyable for me at least.
So how long does it typically take you to write a book?
Funny enough, the writing is actually the shortest part of the venture. The research is usually the longest, as mentioned, just because you're going through so many years and years and years of time. But for me, when I'm writing, usually I just want to, I don't say get it over with. That's not the way to put it. I mean, I don't know if anyone here watched The Odd Couple. I was a big Odd Couple fan, and Oscar Madison in one episode, he's quoting someone who's, I can't remember the exact person he's quoting. The general line is, I love having written, but I don't like writing. That's kind of the way it is. But so I don't want to put it down and come back to it. You get in a groove and you want to kind of do it. If I get tired, I will stop because then you kind of get lazy a little bit. I think you get, if anyone, you get tired and cranky, whatever, you kind of, your body changes and you want to, thank you, Ernest Hemingway. That's not who you quoted in the show though, Mary. I don't know who it was. I can't remember, but I'm sure who, whatever. Anyways, yeah, just, I can't remember the question now, but yeah, that was it.
Just when you're writing, I'm just curious, sort of, I always find that I think I have all my research in place, and then I start writing and I realize that I have to, go do a bunch more research because I come to some spot and I need to know more. Does that happen to you? I mean, does that happen to you fairly often, or you pretty much, have the narrative flow lined up and your sources put together up front?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it fairly often, but it does happen. And I am someone who likes to dive down that rabbit hole. So sometimes to my detriment. But yeah, even if it's for like just a little piece, like for one sentence in the book, I want to make sure I have it right. And again, curiosity. Just I want to get that information. It's my own fun. Sometimes it's not even using the book. But yeah, I will definitely go back, and if I'm writing something like, do I have it right? Did I miss something? Why did I? And sometimes my notes are just maybe not as complete as I like them to be, and I'm like, why did I write that note? And I go back and just kind of research, double back, and find out what's true. But yeah, there's always something going on. Even like I'll write it and go back and read it again. Obviously to make sure it's tight and the edits are you make edits, and even the second time going through, I might go back and make changes. So research wise, so yeah, there's always something going on.
We've talked to get one more process question, because I think this is, for me anyway, one of the most interesting parts of it. Just how everybody tries to write nonfiction baseball books. Did the process differ between the books at all? You've done 3 biographies. It sounds like the process was fairly similar. Is that the case? Is there anything that you learned, like when you did your most recent biography of Caruthers? Is there anything you did differently than you did with Plank, other than that perhaps maybe there's more internet sources out there?
Right. No, I think when I did the Ken Williams book, it worked out well the way I did it. And I just kind of, other than, having to go places or where I'm researching, it worked well. So I don't, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Maybe there's slight tweaks I can't think about, like little things. But for the most part, it's kind of the same process, really. Finding time is the first part of the process, but yeah, it's been about the same.
So we're going to a couple more questions for Dave, then we'll open it up for questions. So feel free to type them into the chat, or if you just want to put your picture on and shout it out, that's probably fine too. What are 1 or 2 of the most important lessons you've learned through your years of writing?
Oh my gosh. One of the most important lessons I've learned in my years of writing. That, oh boy, that's a tough one. The hardest thing for me I don't start until I have a beginning and an end, and in the middle is the easy part. So that's, to me, the how to start a book is the hardest thing for me, at least. But at the same point, I want to know how it's going to end, right? That helps the outline and all that stuff. So I might even have like the last line already set before I even start writing the entire book. How am I getting from point A to point Z? Once I have the A to Z done, B through Y is, to me, is the easiest part. So that's just kind of my lesson, I guess, is like, don't just start writing in this. It's going to figure out on its own, because it usually, it's not going to. So just, organization, that beginning and end, to me, is just so important.
Well, we're looking forward to what you have coming in the future. Can you share any future writing plans?
Well, I just signed a contract last week with McFarland, who I've been doing the past few books with, for supposed to be a book on Purple Marbury. Not quite Deadball, I apologize. Just missed it by a few
We
years.
might let you back on anyway.
But I think I have eight paragraphs written so far, so we've got a long way to go.
I'm looking at, thank you. I'm looking at the questions here. Mark Sternman, did you have a favorite writer from the Deadball era whose work you enjoyed reading, even if we're not entirely on topic?
Favorite author of Deadball era? You know what I do? For baseball books, at least, if it's a subject I'm interested in, I read it. That's pretty much how it goes. I have some favorite authors outside of baseball that I read, that I really enjoy their work, and I'll pretty much read anything they write. But when it comes to baseball, I don't know about X player. Well, or I see a book coming out. Hey, I'm interested in that, which is usually most players or teams or whatever. I'll just read it. So I don't want to say there's a favorite. If you mention one, I might go, oh yeah, that guy or that woman. But on top of my head, I can't think of one. I just reading books of things I enjoy.
Kevin Schaefer asks, do you know if there's any video of Eddie Plank pitching, particularly of throwing the crossfire? Maybe you want to tell us what the crossfire is.
Yeah, the crossfire was his pitch, his style of pitch, his delivery of pitch, let's put it that way. Almost like a sidearm. I describe it in the book. The funny thing about writing a book is people ask you questions, and then I wrote it. It came out in 2022. I wrote it probably in 2019. So 6 years. It's been a while. I've written some books since, so I don't remember every detail of every book. Unfortunately, I probably should have gone over it, but as I said to you off the air, I was out of town for a week, and I just got back last night / this morning, so I haven't had time to refresh my own brain on my own books. But yeah, so it's, I don't want to say it was like a sidearm, but it was more of a step. And I'm left-handed. I can show you. You can't really see it. I'm off the camera, but this kind of like that. You go kind of more off the side, but he had a whole thing to it where he stepped on it. Yeah, through. I'm sorry, I'm giving you a horrible description. Read the book. It's in there. I don't care if you buy it.
Do you know anything about it? Was there any video of it? My sense is that there wasn't much actual useful video until about 1920, but that doesn't mean there wasn't any.
I'm trying to remember if I found any video, but I don't remember any off the top of my head that I can remember finding for the FDAs. Yeah, I don't think so. Yeah, I wish. A lot of descriptions of it. That's about it.
I'll give it a couple of minutes here if there's any more questions. Otherwise,
I have one, Dan. I was curious about Plank was known for being quite a quiet person. When you're writing a biography and you don't have a lot of quotes to work with, how do you show the personal side of Plank? And did you find in your research that he had given more quotes than you thought?
Yeah, good question. Early in his career, he didn't. You're right. He was very reticent, let's say, right? And a lot of times people talk about him, or the writers of the time would describe things or say things because they traveled with the team. They were on the team the entire time. So that's part of the information. But as he got older, he actually started speaking more. And there is a couple of, especially after he got to the St. Louis Browns in 1916, he started speaking a lot more and reflecting on his time in the league. And so these guys look back. So he's in 1916, let's just say, for example, he's talking about something happened in 1909. So then you're informed about what happened earlier. Maybe not in the moment, but that's a lot of times how it works. These guys reflect back and talk. And again, maybe not always accurate, and you can kind of double check things they're saying. A lot of times when they talk about games, and this happens with every player I've ever researched, you find writers or players talking about, oh, I remember back in 19 whatever, and this was a close game between Boston and Philadelphia, and blah blah blah. And you look at the game like, well, they didn't play, and this didn't happen. And baseball research, all the box scores are there, so that kind of stuff you have to kind of balance. But yeah, so a lot of times for Plank, at least, it was how others talked about him, how the writers wrote about him. Really, that's probably the main one. And then using stuff he talked about later, because he did talk a lot more as he got older.
Doug Skipper, your hands up.
Hey, Dan. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit, Dave, about the relationship between Connie Mack and Eddie Plank, how that changed in the later years of his athletics career, particularly in the 1914 World Series, and then how things worked out after that between the two of them.
Yeah, I think everyone who knows Connie Mack knows, like, he had his favorites. You know, how he called guys by their first name. You know, Chief Bender was never Chief Bender. He was one of his favorites. But and you know, Rube Waddell, you know, obviously he tried to tame him, couldn't do that too well. But anyways, with Plank, I think there was always a kind of it was a good relationship, but kind of they knew, you know, Plank held out pretty much every year. So there was that little animosity, little, you know, management versus player stuff too. And then in you know, when he did leave to go to the Federal League, that did you know, didn't sit well with Connie Mack. And again, I go over the entire thing of what happened in the Federal League in the book, but it did not spoil the relationship, because when Plank retired, he would go back to Philadelphia because he did live in Gettysburg, and he would pitch batting practice or hang out with the team. So, and obviously Connie Mack was there for, you know, during that entire time. So anything that happened was water under the bridge, and yeah, they got along just fine.
Any other? I'm just going back to the video question. I'm just curious. I mean, did you look for video at all? Did you happen to find anything? I mean, a lot more is coming. One of the cool things about YouTube is that obviously, and other sources, that one of the things that's come in the last 10 years, I think the amount of video out there has exploded. I'm just curious if, like, for any of your players, did you look for video? Did you find video? Was that part of what you did?
I look for video, and the one video I do remember now at the top of my head, and fortunately nothing with baseball, but he was in a Ford commercial. Eddie Plank was in a Ford commercial. I call it commercial, like a film. I can't remember what year it was, but Ford had some promotion where they drove through the country with a Model T or something like that, and they went through Gettysburg. Eddie Plank was the guy, like, in the Ford, or, you know, getting out and waving to the camera and whatever else. So that's the one. That is one of the only video I can remember finding of him. But yeah, I definitely, you know, you look for video. YouTube's out there. Obviously, YouTube is pretty vast and whatnot. But yeah, for those Deadball era guys, it's hard. You know, I can't remember if there's any World Series footage. I don't think there was. I'm really trying to remember. I'll have to look at my down here. I'll have to look at my bibliography to see if I had any videos, because now I just can't remember. Yeah, I don't remember any off the top of my head.
David Harris asks, how credible do you find newspaper articles in the Deadball era? And what are some signs that what you are reading might be exaggerated or biased?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's hard. Those guys definitely, especially with quotes, you know, they could be, I don't say fabricated, but they could maybe be changed a little bit. And they didn't have recorders, obviously. They were doing everything in shorthand or longhand. And yeah, take it with a grain of salt sometimes, but that's also what you got. So in a book, I might just note, this is what so-and-so wrote, or so-and-so said this, but here's some contradictory evidence. When it comes to games, it's easy for us now to look back because we have all the box scores and we have all the results. So those things are kind of easy to research, but everything else, yeah, you have to kind of sometimes put on your antenna, see what, you know, doesn't pass the smell test, and do a little more research. And, you know, there's also a vast amount of stuff you compile over X amount of years researching, and you can, you know, sometimes these things will kind of piece together as a puzzle. You can kind of make inferences. We'll obviously never have the true, absolute 100% truth because we weren't there, but you do the best you can with what you have in front of you.
Mark Sturman's getting ready to try and make his Stratomatic cards. He asks, if Plank in his prime had faced Ken Williams in his prime, what might have happened?
Lefty on lefty matchup, advantage Plank. Again, could hit lefties, but not quite as well as he hit righties. So I'll give the advantage to Plank. I'm sure Ken would have got one or two off him too. How many times they face each other? I don't know. Give him 100 bats. He'd pop a few home runs,
All right. Any,
especially in St. Louis.
I don't see any other hands. Nothing else in the chat. I'll give this a couple seconds.
One question, Dan.
Yeah.
For Dave. How should we look at Plank after all this time? Should he be thought of as one of the most underrated players of the Deadball era? Is there some other way we should think about him?
I think he's underrated because look at who he played with. Like he played with Ruth Waddell, so he was not the #1 guy in Philadelphia, right? So he was kind of the #2, but he kind of his career's out there. He's always like never the guy on the team, like Jack Combs or Coombs. Apologies, I never know how to pronounce his name. So he was always pitched with all these other great players, but he was never like the great guy for whatever reason, right? So I always think he's underrated. He had the most shutouts until like Warren Spahn for left-hander until Warren Spahn broke it 30 or 40 years later, 50 years later, whatever that year was. 300 game winner in a year where wins mattered, obviously. Very good for his era, a very good strikeout pitcher, always ranked top 10 strikeouts K per 9. Yeah, I think he's just vastly underrated. Again, when I was doing the research, there were no books on Plank. There's books to not every other 300 game winner. So I'm going to go with underrated. Maybe one day he'll be disrated.
I think about his World Series time where he was 2-5 with an ERA of under 1.5. And
right.
just had bad luck. How did he deal with frustration? Because he would either run into Mathewson or he'd have no run support. And it was a tough position for him to be in.
Yeah, I think, boy, you're pressing my memory here. I think he lost the most 1-0 games in World Series history, I want to say. Or maybe it was most times his team was shut out when he pitched, something like that. Yeah, and they were always good games. They were always close. It wasn't like he was losing 7-0 or it was like 3-0, 2-0, 1-0. I think what his greatest satisfaction was when he won. Trying to get pressing my memory here. He won the final game of the World Series, 1913, I want to say. I think that was very satisfying. He didn't pitch in 1910 against the Cubs. Again, my memory is not what it used to be. So that was a little frustrating. But he never really came out and lashed out against teammates. He was a popular teammate as well. I think he had his buddies on the team. So I don't think he ever was like angry. I mean, he wanted to win. Who doesn't want to win? You're a competitor. You're a Major League Baseball player. But I think, like I said, he was very satisfied when he got that. That's like his parents were there, and like he was just a great moment for him in his life.
Well, Tim.
Hey, Dave, thanks for sharing, and Dan, thanks for hosting. So I'm sitting here in Milwaukee that was in 1901, the home of the American League Milwaukee Brewers, which later became the St. Louis Browns. But wondering about when Foreman recommended Plank to Connie Mack, Foreman being his Gettysburg College coach. What was a tryout like? And this is maybe a question for everybody who's Deadball era, but what did you learn about what his tryout was like? Did you learn anything? Or what was a typical tryout like?
Yeah, well, first, I'm also Milwaukee, by the way. So hello, go back one. Yeah, so that story I was never able to prove to be true that Foreman was the one who recommended him, and in fact might be false. It may have been someone else in Gettysburg, and again, I should have had the book in front of me and read it this morning, but I did not get up until much later than I expected. But yeah, so I wanted to know about the tryout. That's like the white whale I could not catch. To know more about exactly how he got on the A's. I tried to piece that puzzle together the best I could. And again, it's a lot of could have been this, could have been this. In my opinion, I don't think it was Foreman who recommended him. But I don't know how the tryout went. The tryout for Connie Mack, for anyone on Connie Mack, was go pitch a game. We'll see how you do. And then if you do good, I'll sign you. Like when he pitched his first game for the A's, Athletics, he was wearing his Gettysburg uniform. He's not wearing Athletics uniform. So that's a Connie Mack. Like I don't know how Connie Mack went from, seeing him to put him in that game, or maybe just been on word. I don't know if he actually threw at the sideline. Connie Mack would kind of get down there and actually catch pitchers back then. He wasn't the kind of Mack we think of, gray hair in the suit. He was maybe 40 years old back then. So he would actually still get down and catch guys who came in to see how they did. So I imagine that's what happened. He said he looked good enough and then threw him out there and said, okay, you're in. So great question. Thank you, though.
Well, Dave, this has been terrific. It's great to have you. Great to talk about your book writing process, all your projects, and looking forward to your next one when you get going on it.
If someone wants to write that for me, I'll give you all the research.
Past those 8 paragraphs.
Yeah, you guys can write that if you want. I'll take the credit. I'll give you all the research. Like I said, it's more fun doing the research than the writing, but it'll get done. Thank you all for having me and joining, and I really appreciate all the questions and your attention. So thank you so much.
Thank you, and hopefully we'll do another one of these when the next Deadball newsletter comes out, probably in roughly 3 months. Take care, everybody.